Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to part five. So this is what we're going to do. In a bit more detail, Paul said it's emergencies and VHF direction finding. We'll do the Mayday and PAN calls, talk about those. We'll talk about the distress and diversion cell, commonly known as D&D, down at Swanwick, and the help they can provide. How you can practice with D&D. We'll mention about the emergency transponder codes, I think a set of three that you need to know. We'll then go on to talk about VHF direction finding, and then it will be the coaching as per normal. We'll do two questions in two blocks. I'll pause for questions at the end of the emergency calls, and then we'll do some more questions at the end to wipe up the VHF direction finding. So the distress state, I'll say that again, the distress state has the prefix Mayday said or spoken three times. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is when you or someone else needs assistance. And the ideas really to have in your head here are that this threat, it's serious, it's obviously dangerous, and it's imminent. The picture covers it pretty well. The other state is urgency. And the spoken words associated with the urgency state are pan, 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 pan. And this is to do with if you have an urgent message to do with a safety or aircraft or vehicle, but it doesn't require immediate assistance. So these words are taken from CAP 413. It's not incredibly obvious with any one situation which category it falls into. And whether it is a Mayday or a pan-pan is really of secondary importance. So even for the exam, there is a grey area, and getting the call right is far more important. And in real life, no one will care if you've prefixed it with Mayday or pan-pan. You should know. Clearly, I'm not saying you shouldn't try and get it right, but equally delay while you try and work out whether it's a Mayday or a pan-pan is inappropriate. In real life, you're not going to comply with the full format which is set out in CAP 413. So for the exam, you do need to know and use the full format, which I think has got 8 points in it from memory. So in real life, you're going to convey the fundamentals, which I'll suggest to you are the call sign type, what's gone wrong, the nature of the emergency, and what you intend to do, and probably to say where you are. Related to this is the idea that there's a hierarchy of calls, with distress being at the top, urgency, direction finding, other safety messages, meteorological and flight regulatory messages as last. So this is a way on any one frequency of deciding who has the right to speak. And so this sequence is important as a concept, and it's probably fairly obvious. At least the top ones are obvious. For the exam, you would want to know that sequence. And however you choose to learn it is up to you. I had somebody learn it like this: Dud, silly men fly. DUDSMF. Dud, silly men fly. Another important point in this altogether rare circumstance, and I suppose rarer still, perhaps, is the notion that you may hear an emergency call. If that happens, then you should obviously leave the frequency quiet, so stay silent. And provided you can do so safely, take a note of the details because, of course, it could be you're the only person who hears the full details. If you could be helpful and stay above, for instance, the scene of a crash or the scene of an ejection or some such thing, in order to guide the emergency services to perhaps the downed pilot, then you should stay on scene and give such information as would be useful on the frequency. Obviously, don't get in the way of anybody else. And having once heard a Mayday call by a glider pilot who was reporting a crash, um, it was surprising how my pulse went up. His panicky voice was quite infectious. So I'm mentioning this idea of staying on scene and being helpful because Cat 413 talks about that. But you shouldn't underestimate really how distracting it is. And you not adding to the emergency by stalling is probably more important. If the call is unanswered, then you should relay the message. And here are some words which might be helpful. I've put in bold the I have intercepted a Mayday from Golf Bravo Juliet Romeo Delta. So the key thing here is not the exact words. The key thing here is to ensure there is no confusion as to who is the emergency aircraft. So if you hear a call, stay quiet, give people a chance to respond, take a note of what you can take a note of. If there is no answer, then relay the call. If you're on a purely gliding frequency, then that wouldn't be a lot of use. Then I would go to the D&D frequency, which is 121.5. But you knew that. If you do speak on 121.5, then the D&D cell at Swanwick, looks like that, will be the primary set of people who will respond. I'm putting it as primary set of people because other stations may be listening to 121.5, and it's, I understand, routine practice for airliners, if they have a second radio and they're not using it, to be listening to 121.5. So others will hear it. So if you speak on 121.5, as I've said, D&D will hear it, and they can provide assistance and coordination for other emergency services that could help you. And critically, they provide a service called auto triangulation. They have a leaflet, by the way, which is available on that link, and you'll get these slides later. I guess you could just Google it. So this auto triangulation then. So long as you are above 3,000 feet, almost certainly, three lines will come together from a set of aerials all around the country to plot your position. So in the London TMA, it's down to, if you're even 2,000 feet, you'll get three lines, and elsewhere you may need to be a bit higher. In Scotland, then you need to be higher still quite often. So it's a very, very useful service, as you can see. And I don't know if Paul does this rhetorically, I'll ask, but whenever I fly with people, then I If they've not used this service before, then I give them a practice with D&D. So if you're going to do that, the first thing to do is to tune 121.5, make sure the volume is up, and then wait. Give it there's no laid down time, but I would say at least a full 30 seconds to make sure nothing else is happening as best as you can, because they could be busy on the OHF frequency, which you won't hear. But that's just another point. Oh, sorry. So the two things you could practice with are you could request a practice pan, and these are the words taken out of Cat 413. Personally, what I hear people say is London Centre Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta request practice pan, and then they tend to, well, they always have said to me, and then go ahead with your practice pan. Again, no one's going to. This is not about getting the words right. This is about being clear. It's not interfering with anybody else, and being clear. It's a practice, and of course, they and I would encourage you to use them, even to practice, so you can see what they can do. And the other thing you can do is ask for a training fix. And a training fix will allow you to trial, as it were, the auto triangulation system. So you can ask for a training fix. This is the system that you would use if you were lost. So if you were lost, then that is a pan, 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 pan call, and say you're lost. But if you just want to try the system, then you could ask for a training fix. Now, if you do try it, then you're going to hear words and phrases which are less commonly heard. So we'll just talk about some of these now. So this will be a standard reply: Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, London Centre. That's their call sign. Continue with practice pan. Or if you ask for a training fix, then they might ask you to squawk a 4-digit code. They might say transmit for DF, in which case you could say transmitting for DF and say your whole call sign again. That's all that will be needed. So it's just to give the system another chance to plot you. They may say report your heading. They may ask you to climb. I've had that. And once they've a typical reply might be to a training fix, something like this: the system shows you 3 miles southwest of Milton Keynes. Then they will say something like this: do you require further assistance? So clearly in a training context, you're going to say negative, and then announce the frequency, say thank you if you like, and then announce the frequency you're going to go to. Of course, if they have given you a squawk, then they'll probably say squawk conspicuity. If they forget to do that, then don't forget to go back to the conspicuity setting once you leave them. So there are 3 transponder codes that have specific meanings. This is a way of remembering them. 7700, 77 going to heaven. This is the emergency one. So if you were in distress, the ideal order to do things is to squawk 7700, then make your call. Cat 413 says if you're already talking to an ATSU, then you should stay on that frequency. So if you're already talking to East Midlands and that's where you have your emergency, you do not change to 121.5. You speak to East Midlands, and if East Midlands have given you a squawk, then you keep their squawk as a routine. It does say it's pilot's discretion. But to give a clear-cut case, if you're between frequencies, then squawk 7700, select 121.5, make sure the volume's up, and then make your Mayday call. So at 77 going to heaven, the emergency one. 76 or 7600 76 need a fix. Radio failure. 7500 75 stay alive. Hijack. Or unlawful interference is what I think CAP 413 calls it. I'll just put this one in as a slightly odd one, but I'll put it in there. 0030 is the lost transponder code. That's pretty much it. Just one diversion into gliding. If you find yourself in this state, to try and avoid the scrambling of the air ambulance and everybody else with blues and twos, you may wish to put this phone number into your handset and call them and tell them that you're fine, and where you are and so forth. So it's perhaps, well, I think for other reasons, it's worth having the D&D phone number stored in your contacts. You don't have to do it. It's just a suggestion. Clearly, if you have landed, having spoken to D&D and have not managed to, well, if you have spoken to D&D with a pan or a distress, and then you're on the ground and you haven't said goodbye to them on the air, then give them a ring and tell them what's happened. So, Paul, I'll pause there and see if there are any questions arising from the first half.
Just a couple, Tudor, or coming up. So Joshua asks, would you typically carry or be expected to carry a written set of emergencies when flying? I think he means checklists. Would there be a set of actions such as switching things off and reducing altitude, etc.? Want to pick that one up?
It's absolutely fine because this is all really about power flying largely, so it's a perfectly fair question. I'll just say that there is a checklist. If you're power flying, then there will be a checklist with the aircraft, and follow that checklist. If I've misinterpreted the question, then let me know.
Yeah,
that's it.
I think that's right. Typically, people have memory items that they'll do, and then there'll be checklists for trying to sort stuff out. In the gliding world, we don't have much in the way of checklists, and we're probably not going to deal with emergencies in that way. So we wouldn't carry on in the gliding world. Okay, Steve says, I presume that 121.5 will reach D&D no matter where you are. You can't be out of range. Depends on where you are, Steve. Much of the UK, but I'm not sure about Scotland. You're got a good chance if you're at a reasonable height of being in range, but you get behind a mountain somewhere and it's less likely. Other parts of the world, they don't have the equivalent of D&D, so you're trying to talk to airliners who are above you somewhere, probably. Sheila, anything to add?
As you get from experience, and I won't take any questions on this, but as you get lower and lower, then it goes from a 3-line fix to a 2-line fix, and if you're in really bad trouble, and this was in East Anglia, then you're down to a single line fix. So it does degrade as you get lower, and just in prep for tonight, I reread some stuff, and it makes the point if you're over the sea, then it's poor. So you can't guarantee being heard by D&D, but you will almost certainly be heard by an airliner who will relay.
Anthony asks, if you see a crashed aircraft and do a mayday call, whose details you give in the message in terms of position, altitude, heading, etc., and how do we avoid ambiguity of whether we're giving our details or the details of the crashed aircraft?
Well, I think plain English is going to be the answer here. So I think you simply need to say, your position heading and level could be relevant. It's true, but simply say you're not going to know the registration of the aircraft on the ground. So you're simply going to speak clearly and say Eton Brace strip. I can see a light aeroplane, a green, if you want to say, green light aeroplane has gone through the western boundary of Eton Brace strip. Say where Eton Brace strip is, and finish with your call sign. There won't be any confusion.
Yeah. So there's real life in this case where we're going to say what's necessary.
Mm.
And in the test, you need to be able to demonstrate you can do the standard format. Fortunately, there's a piece of paper with the standard format on, so this isn't as difficult as it sounds.
No.
Okay. Um, Mason asks, in Scotland below 3,000 feet and D&D can't get a fix, what happens? They're not going to tell you where you are, Mason. It's not a perfect world. Sandy asks, is it still London Centre in Scotland? I don't know. Julie, do you?
I think it is actually. I think at one time it wasn't, but it is now.
Okay. Some
Yes,
of
it
our
is.
Scots might. Somebody I think just said that it is. Thank you. Um, Francis, if you're working in ATSU and they've instructed you to report and a mayday comes on afterwards, do you still report or silently leave the frequency?
Okay. Well, again, there won't. I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable question. But there will be an infinite number of questions, and there won't really be one right answer. So I would say judge it by how busy it is. And if that of course leads on to the next question, Francis, that if it is really busy, what should you do? Well, if you think you'll be a nuisance, then go to another frequency. For instance, London Information 124.6 on my side of the country. Tell them what's happened, or tell the next station you go to. So let's say you were speaking to East Midlands, but they were dealing with the emergency. Your next station was Birmingham. Well, tell Birmingham that you're speaking to them without having signed off.
Yeah. And then John asks, I assume passing on GPS coordinates from a moving map device is acceptable. Yes, John, just difficult and error prone, I think is the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it, Tudor, on the questions for now.
Okay, great. So we'll move to VHF direction finding. Second. 1 moment, please. So this is the idea here is that if you speak on particular frequencies, then the control tower control can work out where you are. That's just have that as an idea to start with. So that's of course useful. So here's the call: Cranford approach Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta request QDM, and then put your call sign at the end again to give the controller time to look at the ground station equipment. This is not a very routine thing. This is not a very routine thing to be in use these days. So they may need a moment to look at the equipment and set it up. So in this case, then, it's a QDM is the magnetic heading to steer to get to the station. So on the right hand side, so the situation is as per the left hand side of the screen. In the control tower, there is a piece of equipment which could look like that, and you can see, hopefully from the diagram, I haven't got a protractor out, but if that aeroplane in zero wind flies 120, it will end up at the control tower. So that's a QDM, and that's the pattern or the format to use for the call. Their station, call sign, your request, finish with your call sign. They will reply back in this form, your call sign, tell you it's a QDM, give you the heading. So Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta QDM 120 degrees, class Bravo. So it could be class Alpha Bravo Charlie. However, if having said that, it can't be because the only one that they will ever use is class Bravo, which is, I'm happy to be corrected, but I didn't check, but it's plus or minus 5 degrees. So, and because that's on the list of items to be read back in CAP 413, the pilot needs to read back the QDM 120 degrees class Bravo, finishing with your call sign. So there are three different types of bearing. QDM. So DM, direction magnetic, might help you remember. So direction magnetic to the station. QDR is the R, I think of as a radial coming away from the station. So it's the magnetic bearing from the station. So if you think of spokes, bicycle spokes radiating from the hub of a bicycle wheel. So this is the bearing from the station. And a QTE, which I think would only ever be the preserve of professional navigators with a plotting table in the back of an aeroplane, is the true bearing from the station. This diagram, I think, is helpful. Notice that the heading of the aircraft is immaterial. The heading of the aircraft does not matter. So QDM, QDR, QTE. Not all airfields have this capability. Cranfield, my local airfield here, does. And so if you look on the half mil chart, it says VDF, VHF direction finding, and it tells you the frequency that that service is available, that will provide that service. So you could use it to just become a bit orientated. So you could ask Cranfield for a QDM, and if they say south, or say 180 degrees class Bravo, then you know you're north of the airfield. You could, in theory, get a QDM from one station or a QDR from one station and a QDR from another station and do your own sort of triangulation with two lines. It's a bit theoretical. I'm sure nobody would do that. It's just a way of explaining the system. And I've actually had in a glider, ATC use the system to determine whether I was north or south of their centre line. So they may, it's unusual, but I can't say it's never happened because they did say to me, transmit for DF. And what they were doing was working out which side of the runway I was. So it is there, can be used. If you're actually lost, you're going to use a transponder if you've got one, and you're going to use 121.5. But it is part of the service and system that is available, and it is part of the test. And that's it, Paul. So very quickly, I'll be coming to you, very shortly, I'll be coming to you for questions. Next week, as you've already said, we'll be looking at the exams, more coaching in the format we've been used to. We'll follow that. So, Paul, anything else?
Yeah, so a few questions. John follows up on his passing GPS coordinates question, saying, "Well, I take a photo and pass them, I think. Hope I don't have to ever." So we're in practical things here, John. It's aviate, navigate, communicate. So fly the aeroplane first. That's the important thing. And the purpose of a Mayday call is to get help, but there's no point getting help if you've crashed because you're focusing on talking to somebody. Fly the aeroplane first.
Paul, can I just come in on that?
Yeah.
So, arguably I owe my life to D&D once, but I still had to tell them at one point, can you stop unless it's urgent? So it is the point you're making kind of, in a sense, doesn't need echoing, but what does happen in a real emergency is it becomes a bit parent-child. Well, it did with me, or could do, and they will keep trying. You sort of give up your agency as the pilot in command, and you mustn't do that. You have to fly the airplane. So even if they're trying to give you more and more information, don't keep talking. It is really important to fly. And you might say that's a stupid, obvious thing to say, but it isn't that obvious when it happens.
Yeah,
Okay.
my apologies there. What I was referring to was a downed aircraft, and if you had to give a position, then and you mentioned about not leaving the area. So obviously, I could say I was 6 miles east of Denby, but that's I was just thinking, if I could give a more accurate answer, if I'd seen something flip over, then that would be a better thing to give. So I was
Yeah,
just trying to think of a better way of doing it.
if you can do it, but it's still quite high workload
Yeah.
reading lat
Yeah.
longs
Okay.
off nav systems. I mean, you can do it,
Yeah.
but you might do better. I mean, I've on my nav system, I've always got an airport page, and I have the bearing from and the distance
Yeah.
in
Yeah. I've
nautical
got the same.
miles, and I would give them that. That would
Okay.
be perfectly accurate enough.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Don't we're
I'm
still
poor
going to fly an
pilot. The more I
aircraft.
can give, the better.
Yeah. And Anthony, to sort of expand it as well. In the event, again, we're talking about the event of a downed aircraft in your reporting. So in the test, Anthony, I would run through the checklist of the things on a Mayday call and put my position and height and bearing and qualifications in because that's what I'm asked to do for the test. In real life, I keep it really simple and talk about the aircraft on the ground and relatively little about me, other than if I was flying a glider, I'm in a glider, I'm at 4,000 feet above the site. This is what has happened. Um,
Again, Paul, I'm just going to come in and say, as an ex-examiner, so with that caveat, an examiner's not will probably have already given you your own pan call or your own distress situation. I can't see an
yeah,
examiner asking you to do something that's really false and difficult and complicated. I really would say, don't worry about this. Know the call, know the sequence, um, but don't overthink this.
okay. Anthony asks, when requesting QDM, do you use their call sign at the start, even if you're already in two-way comms with them? Anthony, what you're trying to do is pad the call out a bit. So it's long enough that they've got time to look down, switch the machine to the right setting, and then take note of what it says. So you're just putting in some filler words so that you're making noise for a while. That's why there's your call signs in twice. That's why their call signs in.
That's an
Um,
exception. Yeah.
yeah. Cambridge, by the way, they're when they're on approach, they've got a radar in front of them, even if they're not radar. And when you transmit, a line comes up in that direction on the radar. So they use it all the time. So if you tell them you're southwest and you're south, they go, no, you're not, you're south, because they're getting that off the DF. Um, Kevin asks, how does VDF work with just one reference point? Easy enough, Kevin. If you are lost and you get VDF and you get one line, you can fly towards that line. So that will eventually get you to the airfield. There used to be instrument approaches where you would make successive calls flying towards the station until you got the reciprocal, by which time you knew that you'd gone over the top, and then you could make an instrument approach using this method. Horrible way to do it, but there you go.
Okay, I have got another real life addition to that. So in my drama, they said, "Oh, you could be anywhere on a 300 nautical mile line." He was clearly fascinated. I wasn't. But what they can do is get you to speak to another frequency, so that
Yeah.
could theoretically happen, where that station will give you the sort of thing that Paul's just talked about, and by that means that they can plot you.
Yeah, we used to navigate around IFR doing that sort of thing. So, James says, would you report a glider that has landed out in case they need help? Need help? No, no. In the gliding world, we land out all the time, and the last thing people want is air ambulances turning up. If it was upside down, then yeah, sure. And I've heard a Mayday call as well, and that was a glider crashing with the pilot on a parachute, and that was quite fun in a bad way. Right. And then we've got, is there a correct form of words akin to I'm relaying? Yes, Chula gave you some words.
I think I gave you words for I've intercepted.
Oh, I have intercepted, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the equivalent.
Okay. So I think the answer to that question is no. When I looked last year, I didn't see it. So I have heard it said Mayday relay, Mayday relay. But by all means, look it up. If you can find it, you can tell us next week. But I don't think it's in there.
Okay. You've just got to make it clear.
Yep.
So I have intercepted a Mayday makes it clear. you could
Pardon?
use other words.
I'm going to start chat from Scone. Why? Yeah.
Okay, I think that's it on questions, Sheila.
Well, so I think some people have sent me some, so let me just look.
Okay.
Squawk 030, what happens next? You're going to speak to 121.5 and they will already see you, so they'll be expecting you. As I've never done that, but I think that's the answer to that. Let me just see if what else is here. Point to note, ATS units off, this is from Mark, often connect call signs as to squawks. Another good reason not to change to 7700 unless you're instructed to. Okay, so although Cat 413 says it's pilot's discretion, Mark, I think you're a controller, so there's good reasons not to change your squawk unless you're told to. Can't select questions to Paul on chat, by the way. Okay, says Nigel. Okay, don't know why. All right, I think that's it, Paul. Thanks.
Okay. Colin Roger, who is an examiner, says Mayday Relay does not exist. I think you're right, Colin. It doesn't exist in the current set of words. I think it has in the past in some places, possibly military. And you report the call sign of the station transmitting the emergency twice. Okay, he says. Adrian says, I think you said that somewhere on ruskin.me.uk you published a list of which parts of Cat 413 were important to learn. Yes, it's on there somewhere. I'd have to look for it, Adrian, but if you remind me at some point, I'll help you look for it. Okay. Right, I think that is it. Phil, are we set to go to breakout groups?
We are indeed.
Okay, then everybody have fun doing your Mayday calls and all the rest. Good luck, and we will see you next week. Phil, if you want to press the button.